So I'm inviting the speakers to the floor. Okay, very good.
I'll be sitting here.
Very good. So welcome everyone. So I think so far it's been a great event, and I wanted to congratulate the organizers for this event. Great to see everyone face to face, and so much excitement in the room, I have to say, and great session so far. My name is Charles Cormier. I'm the Regional Director for Infrastructure in Europe and Central Asia for the World Bank, and I'm happy to be moderating this and very privileged to moderate this session. I think you're in for a treat. We're going to discuss disruptions everywhere, how to make supply chains more resilient. And we have a very great distinguished panel of experts. I'm quite excited. I will just start to say that we all know that that supply chains are very important for the economy. We almost never think about them, but of course, since COVID, we've had huge disruptions. During COVID, we saw disruptions because of lockdowns, because of the labor shortages, even capacity shortages. But after that, we've seen other disruptions. There was the event in the Suez Canal. There was a drought in the Panama Canal, and more recently, I think in my region in Europe and Central Asia, of course, we have the Russian invasion of Ukraine that's created huge disruptions, at least in the railway sector. And so it's a very timely discussion to talk about. How do we shift from just-in-time planning to just-in-case? Do we take into account resiliency? And what we wanted to do in this session is to hear from policymakers about and practitioners about what are the strategies, the tools, the policy choices that are available for resilience. And so that's essentially the title of this panel. I hope to. So I'll get every panelist. There's a keynote speaker, and I'll get every panelist to speak. But I also wanted to hear from you if you have questions. So we will have a session at the end for your questions. So keep them in mind. And with that, let me start with introducing our keynote speaker, which is Mr. Serkan Aslanalp, who is the Deputy Division Chief and Advisor to the Managing Director of the IMF, our sister institution. So let's start with your keynote, and then I'll introduce the speakers afterwards. So Serkan, the floor is yours.
Make sure that this works too. Good. Good afternoon. Many thanks to Charles for the kind introduction, and to Dominique and his colleagues for this great organization. It's a pleasure for us to be here to introduce Portwatch. We have an important panel discussion, so I'll try to be brief. But as Charles mentioned, Portwatch is an online platform. It's designed to monitor and simulate trade disruptions due to climate extremes and other types of shocks. It was launched in November as a beta version and in partnership with Oxford University, and is available at imf.org/Portwatch. So we have an amazing team behind this platform. The team includes Parisa Kamali, Robin Kopke, Alessandro Sossi from the IMF, and Jasper Verschuur from Oxford University. But the team even goes beyond this core group, if you wish. And we have also some colleagues who've been supporting us from our creative lab, our Office of Innovation and Change, and our communications department. And not to mention, a lot of partners contributed to this project, including SECO, Esri, our technology partner, United Nations, our data provider, as well as colleagues from the World Bank and the World Trade Organization. So what did we try to do with this platform? We all know that shocks to trade and supply chains can propagate rapidly around the world, leading to economic disruptions and with real implications for people. So with that in mind, we designed Portwatch with three purposes. First, it's a monitoring device. It aims to track shipments at major ports and critical choke points around the world in real time, in what we call the monitoring layer. Second, it aims to simulate port disruptions and track spillovers in what we call the spillover analysis part of the platform. And third, it aims to evaluate the present and future climate risks to ports and quantify the trade at risk from various climate hazards in what we call the climate scenarios later. So those are the three layers, and those are our three kind of purposes for the whole project. And obviously, the overall objective for this is to provide actionable and data-driven insights about climate and other risks to trade, and in doing so, foster international dialogue around vulnerabilities of the maritime trade network among policymakers, analysts, and the public. So I was asked to do a kind of a brief demo of the platform. It's always risky to do these things in real time, but I'll do my best. I'll try my best. So if you can have, thank you. So this, let me walk you through a couple of pages. This is, I can see it here. Hopefully, yes, you can see it also there. Very briefly, I want to take you through essentially a couple of pages of the platform. This is the landing page. On the right, you see a spinning globe that shows the 1,400 ports and choke points that we monitor on a regular basis. On the left, if I scroll down a little bit, you will see two recent disruptions that were actually mentioned by Charles and been in the news lately, disruptions in the Red Sea and at the Panama Canal. I will get back to that later. And below, you will see some summary information about the platform. I already mentioned the number of ports and choke points that we monitor. We also track about 100,000, 20,000 vessels, both cargo and tankers. And we have daily data going back to 2019. And the data cover about 99% of commercial maritime traffic, which handles about, as you know, $14 trillion of trade every year. Finally, if you go to the top part here, you could find information about the platform, about the data, the methodology, but also find links to sign up to our alerts, which we issue after there's a major disruption. And we've been doing that consistently for the Red Sea every 2 weeks. And there's also a link there for you to send us your feedback if you find something is missing on the platform, which we're always happy to hear. Okay, and next couple of minutes, let me just walk you through 3 specific use cases of the platform that you may be interested in. This is the Red Sea situation. Here you can see the traffic that we monitor on the Suez Canal. These are daily transit calls, but you can also look at transit trade volume. The black line is the historical, or I should say, is the moving average from a year ago, and the yellow line is the current one. And from this, you can already see there's a 50% drop in transit calls, and the picture looks the same for transit volume. So you can have this information at your fingertips from the platform. If you scroll down a little bit, you would also see the same numbers for the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, as well as the Cape of Good Hope, which, of course, where the traffic has been rerouted to. That's one. The second use case is about the Panama Canal, and the previous one was essentially a geoeconomic shock, if you will, and this one is more of a climate shock. With, as you know, with the drought in the Panama Canal, there have been restrictions on the passage of ships through the canal. And here, again, looking at the same chart, you could see that 1/3 of transit calls or transit volume is the same, has disappeared because of those restrictions. And you can look at this for the last 3 months or for the last year or all the way going back to 2019. Final use case, if you wish, is what we call the climate scenarios. I mentioned this as one of the 3 purposes of the platform, or 3 layers of the platform. And here what you see is climate risks to ports all around the world expressed as expected downtime, number of days per year, from different climate hazards. The ones in red are, for example, from cyclones, and you can see East Asia, especially being hit by those, or expected to be hit by those, given the frequency and the intensity of those hazards in that region. And the last page I want to show is that aggregating all that information around the world and looking at it just for a single country. In this case, we picked United States. And this here shows you the top most climate vulnerable ports for the United States, and reflecting all those hazards all around the world at different ports. And what's interesting here is that Obviously, some of the climate hazards or vulnerable ports are domestic. They're in the US on the coastline, but a lot of it is also in Asia. So because those are hit quite a bit by as I mentioned, by cyclones, the US essentially also has a vulnerability to climate hazards through its supply chains to Asia. And we've been trying to quantify this through the amount of trade that may be lost if there are if some of those hazards materialize. So those are 4 pages that I wanted to share with you. I'm glad the demo worked. I will just maybe stop here in the interest of time, and we have an important panel discussion, and look forward to our dialogue. Thank you.
So, Serkan, as you take your seat, I wanted to. Great that the IMF has launched this platform. Great initiative, I would say. Are you able to tell already which risks are more important? Are you seeing any data in terms of what are the risks we should plan for that have the largest, let's say, impact?
Yes. Yes. There's an active discussion going on, as you may imagine, in our building on these things. And I would suggest perhaps that 2 that we find to be the most pertinent is geo-economic or geopolitical risks or fragmentation. And the other one is climate risks, which we expect would be increasingly more intense. So we are focused this year, especially to build further on those 2 aspects on the platform. How can we monitor trends related to fragmentation in the global supply chains? And how can we deepen our analysis of climate risks? So those would be our top 2 risks that we see.
Very good. So thank you. We're coming back to you, so don't fall asleep. I wanted to introduce the next panelist. This is Jan Hoffman, who's the Chief of Trade Logistics Branch at UNCTAD. He's actually connected online. Jan has a illustrious career at UNCTAD, and in particular, he's the author and coordinator of the Review of Maritime Transport and Maritime Country Profiles and the Liner Shipping Connectivity Index. So lots and lots of experience. So Jan, welcome. Sorry. I wanted to hear from you. So I know that you're working towards the Global Supply Chain Forum in Barbados in 2024, in May 2024, and you have lots of partners, including the World Bank. So can you tell us a little bit more about what this forum is about and how will it help us strengthen supply chain resilience?
No, yeah, thanks for the question. Very good question, very timely, but also thanks for the invite and congrats to the ThoughtWatch team, really great tool, which we're also using. So in Barbados, 21 to 24 May, you're all invited, if you're not have it on your agenda. This came actually out of our previous UNCTAD ministerial conference, where then the governor of Barbados realized, the actually supply chains matter. Of course, they were preaching to the converted, but some reasoning behind this. So in fact, in this very nice background note the World Bank produced, are some of the numbers that when freight rates go up, they in the end they actually do have an impact on prices, especially for small island developing states. We've also seen in the Black Sea after this, we started this the war in Ukraine, how increases in transport costs are actually half of the explanation. In food prices in the world went up because there was less food, but half of the increase in food price was actually due to higher transport costs. So I think that's also behind the reasoning for this session. The Red Sea ships have to go longer distance. They also go faster. Our data shows 70% more emissions on the route between Asia and Europe. Think about climate change. The Panama Canal was already mentioned, almost 50% decline in the last 2 years of transit, also shown very nicely by the tool of the IMF. That's the result of climate change. So coming to the risk, energy transition, biggest challenge. World Bank, very happy to have you here with your various team. Thank you for joining. So yeah, this is more it's 21, 24 May in Barbados. I can send you the link. Please join us free of charge. You only have to come in person, no online connection, in person to beautiful Barbados. A lot of high-level ministers, but I'm actually more enthusiastic about all the partners that will be there. Yes, a lot of ministers, high-level heads of organization, but really the who is who of supply chains will be there, and you can meet all of them, all of us in person. Thanks for the question.
Very good. Thanks, Jan. So, yeah, thank you for highlighting the fact that transport costs did contribute to the significant increase in inflation we saw, in particular in Europe, but elsewhere, because of the food security issues and all the logistics problems of the Black Sea. One quick question on the Red Sea. So, on the Red Sea, we heard from Serkan that there's been attacks on the Red Sea, and we saw a half, reduction by 50% of the port of call in that area, but doubling of the volumes around the Cape of Good Hope. So, what do you see in terms of the winners and losers of this type of a shift in global value chains?
Yeah, I mean, just yesterday I was here at some private sector shipping conference in Geneva, and ship owners, apart from the honestly serious concern about lives of seafarers, but ship owners actually realize, if I have to go longer distance, there's more demand for ton miles of my services, and they make more money. But that also again means higher prices for all of us. The countries that are most negatively affected is of course Egypt. Fewer transits, less income from the transits, but also more costly trade. They are no longer at the crossroads, but they are now at the end of the dead end of a cul-de-sac. Then something novel we calculate in our assessment, which are the countries that most depend on the different canals. So Sudan, Yemen, Djibouti, Saudi Arabia, and Seychelles, we calculated, depend for about 20 to 33% of their trade in volume on the canal. In Panama also, Ecuador, Peru, Chile depend on 20 to 25% of the trade volume on the Panama Canal. So yes, the most important clients for the canals may be US, China trade, or Europe, Asia trade, but there are some countries that are very, very much negatively affected. If I may, as you asked the question on the impacts, when the Suez Canal is restricted or closed, demand for shipping services goes up because you have to go around South Africa. When the Panama Canal is reduced, actually, at least for container shipping, demand for ton miles goes down, because the main competition for the Panama Canal is the land bridge. If you need to get cargo from China to Chicago, New York, you either go through Panama or through Suez. And if these are restricted, then you drop your cargo in Los Angeles and go by land. In both cases, we have more emissions.
Very good. Thank you, Jan. So the next panelist is Mona Haddad, who's my colleague here at the World Bank. She's the Global Director for Trade, Investment, and Competitiveness, and have an illustrious career at the bank. Have worked across the regions and also, I think, at IFC. So Mona, I wanted to hear from you about, so we've talked about these global value chains, but are the fact that essentially trade has relied on global value chains make them more vulnerable, and is the solution nearshoring, onshoring, as we've seen in the last few years? Is that a better approach to resilience?
Thank you very much, Charles, and good to see Jan, who's a colleague from UNCTAD, and everybody on this panel. Thanks to all of you from Transport. It's really our next family because we work very closely with you in trade. I always say, to be able to trade, as you know, just to put a bit of context, has been a major driver of growth for developing countries, especially those that embraced globalization and opened their markets. But it's not enough just to have better access to markets in terms of tariffs. It's not enough to be competitive at the products that you want to export. Trade facilitation and logistics are extremely important to maintain that competitiveness, because you might lose it by the time you actually ship your products for export. So that's why in the trade unit in FE, soon to be called Prosperity, we work very closely with transport, and I see many friends in the audience here. So just, with this little bit of background in terms of how trade really since the 1990s was a major driver for growth for developing countries, it also kind of transformed a little bit along the way by increasing the global value chains, which consist of 50% of trade, and global value chains started forming because precisely transport costs went down and trade barriers went down. So instead of producing an entire computer in Thailand and then shipping it to the US, you actually produce a computer in 15 countries in East Asia, each one specializing in one part of the computer, assemble it and take it to its final destination. That's why these supply chains are important, because this production system is as resilient as its weakest point. If anything breaks down in the middle, then the whole production process stops. And this is how production has been going on in recent years, and this is how we were able to have countries specialize in parts of the value chain and therefore be able to take advantage of trade opportunities, but also lower the cost of all these products. So it was all very good for us. So in 2008, after the global financial crisis, trade as a share of GDP in developing countries started slowing down, or at least staying at a flat rate, growing at a flat rate, and now it has been subject to a lot of new shocks that we didn't have before. And you know what they are. It started with COVID, pandemic, geopolitical tensions, reshoring, friendshoring, weather shocks, and so on. And at the same time, there has also been a rise in protectionism. Many countries are now putting in place many more export bans, subsidies, which also give makes the level playing field unfair at the global level. And I believe about 50% of goods trade is subject to subsidies, which again is a form of protectionism in a way. And all this has really slowed down trade. It wasn't globalization per se. So to answer your question directly, it's not really globalization that slowed down trade and created the disruptions. It's actually the disruptions from policy and some from shocks coming from pandemic and so on that really are affecting the supply chains. In addition to that, you have the climate change mitigation policies of developed countries that are being put in place in Europe, in the US, and other, such as the CBAM, the EU Deforestation Act, the Supply Chain Due Diligence, the IRA here in the US, and so on. And these are also making the supply chain less resilient because these policies are putting a lot of stress on developing countries especially, and small and medium enterprises in developing countries to comply, and they're not well equipped to comply. And because they're not equipped, they're going to have to disrupt the supply chain. They're going to have to exit the supply chain. So there are lots of factors really affecting the supply chain, and it is not globalization. And finally, last point on your just-in-time, we started this mantra of we are moving away from just-in-time to just-in-case, because we realized that supply chains needed to be more resilient, and maybe there is room for to increase inventory, to build inventory, increase lead times, and all that. But the evidence is showing that this has passed. No one in the private sector, from the evidence we have, is following a just-in-case policy anymore. So it came during the COVID, and then it kind of seems to have disappeared. Thank you.
Okay, wow. So I have a question at the tip of my tongue, but I'm going to wait at the end because I want to bring Serkan in here too. So let's bring the other panelists on the other two panelists on. So we have Hiroki Yamaguchi, who's the Senior Director of Transport from the Asian Development Bank. I think the Asian Development Bank's been quite engaged, as the World Bank and other IFIs, in the issue of the Middle Corridor, which is essentially connecting Western China to Western Europe, but also connecting regional trade, especially since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So can you, I think the ADB has done a lot of work on trade corridors. So can you share a bit your lessons learned from the work on specifically on other corridors that applies to this Middle Corridor, and how would you take advantage of the specific lessons to enhance the resilience in other parts of the world?
Thank you. Thank you, Charles. And then thank you for inviting us to this very exciting meeting. Even previous session is very exciting on this EVs. So ADB is actually, we hear the canals, this Panama and the Suez, but our work is not covered. Those are far beyond. So the focus may be more on the Middle Corridor, which is actually, some of them may know or may not know, that's basically linking with the East and West, PRC areas to the EU. So that corridor is the Middle Corridor, we call it. And then actually ADB works on those corridors under the CAREC platform, Regional Cooperation in South Central West. It's actually already, we have Corridor 2 as defined, and then work on lots of the investments already there. So Kazakhstan also, we have a lot on the road projects to connect the East, West Europe, West China connectivity, Kyrgyzstan, also border areas to connect with the PRC, and also Uzbekistan, railways, and then also road projects, especially on this East-West corridor with a focus. And then the analytical side, actually, we also undertook lots on this port and logistics study. That as a textbook way, saying the problem is the capacity, potential capacity is there, but those capacities are largely lost due to the inefficiency of the trade facilitation inefficiency. And also we have a lot on the technical works on the traffic to see how the alternative routes be help for those situations against the disruptions, etc. And then also specifically, we also talk with Azerbaijan and Georgia, two countries, to improve the border crossing Silk Road program. Although it's a bit stuck with some issues with finding out the road connection to further beyond internally. So whatever, those kind of things we are doing. So taking out from those experience, actually the issue, I would say, three parts. One, actually to against the disruption, definitely we require diversify the sourcing. So that means that for the transport, it's alternative routes. So for the Middle Corridor, we have North Corridor heavily used and the South Corridor a bit. And then, of course, the Middle Corridor we are talking about as an alternate. So that's one. But at that time, we need to consider infrastructure plus the multimodal connectivity. That's the one. Second one is the not just infrastructure, but the soft side development of the trade facilitation elements. It's a vehicle movement and then customs clearance systems, etc. And then the third one is the definitely require the collaboration among the stakeholders, especially governments and government. That also the key to develop those soft side elements. So we are working on that or those areas. And then the soft side areas, we are hoping for a positive disruption. It's digitization. So that one will help substantially enhance the efficiency of those trade facilitation elements. And then also those technologies or digitization may help also the like ship liners to optimize the lining of this optimization of the use of the fleets, etc. So those are the more positive discussion, but our discussion here is a more negative discussion side on that. So I stop here. So that's the 3 lessons I would say that one.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for that. So let me introduce the final, but not least, of the panelists. So Ms. Lulu Chu, who is actually the Urban Mobility Manager of World Resource Institute in China. So far, Lulu, we've been talking about global supply chains mostly, but to what extent so you've worked a lot, I think, in the urban space. So my question is, to what extent do supply chain resilience in cities face the same or different challenges compared to the global supply chains?
Thank you very much for inviting me. My pleasure. First, I want to start with why the last mile urban delivery is important for the entire global supply chain. Last mile delivery has high cost and high inefficiency. Based on statistics for parcel delivery, 2/3 of the costs come from the last mile delivery. And it's often the most inefficient part of the global supply chain, especially in developing countries where we usually don't have sufficient warehouses, well-organized distribution centers, and sometimes our address system is a mess, which complicates the last mile delivery. And for the specific challenge that are facing the urban delivery system, it's kind of similar to the global supply chain in some ways, because we also have the risks of nature disasters, traffic congestions, shortage of laborers, and just the transition issues, and just to name a few. On top of that, urban delivery system also has this unique challenge. One challenge is access restrictions, where trucks are forbidden to enter a certain part of the cities or certain road segments, because for city governments, they have multiple priorities, and the supply chain is one of their priorities, or sometimes, very unfortunately, not even a priority. One extreme case is during the COVID period, where all the roads are blocked in Chinese cities. The supply of food to cities almost becomes impossible because the city governments prioritize public health first. And the second type of challenge or situation is for urban delivery, it's 2C, is facing individual customers. And in recent years, we have seen increasing trend of increasingly demanding customer requirement for faster deliveries, like the same day deliveries or instant deliveries. And in events of weather, extreme weathers, and these kind of deliveries cannot meet the demand, and the customer expectation will be greatly affected. I just stop here.
Thank you. Thank you. So very important role on the last mile for sure. So global supply chains don't work without the last mile. So coming back to a couple of things we've heard today. So, Serkan tells us that one of the major disruptions is geopolitics and not necessarily the globalization issue of supply chains. And Mona said that as well, that the vulnerability has not been about globalization. So what my question to the panelists, and maybe all of you or any of you can answer, is what then can we help, how do we help supporting emerging markets and developing countries in building resilience of the supply chains? If the issues are around climate, geopolitics, and so on, what can we do to help as MDBs with emerging economies and developing countries to build resilience? Perhaps not to their supply chains, but essentially to their trade markets. Is there anything we can do? So I don't know who wants to answer that. IMF or Mona?
Go ahead.
Maybe I can just say a few words in terms of a very important question. What we noticed in our work is that in the Pacific, which is the region that we know a little bit better within the team, essentially all the northern Pacific Islands, for example, are dependent on Guam for all their transshipments, and the South Pacific Islands are very much reliant on Fiji for their shipments. But we didn't know that, at least we in the fund were not that well aware of it. And so the lesson for us was that mapping the global supply chains with this vast amount of data that we now have could be extremely helpful for us to spot the vulnerabilities for emerging markets and low-income countries that may rely specifically on one or two regional ports. And those regional ports may be essentially regional public goods. So as IFIs, perhaps we need to invest in them more, and because the benefits don't just accrue to those countries, but the countries around them. That would be one takeaway for us.
Thank you. So first, I want to say that there are things that we're doing to improve the efficiency of ports and customs that we need to continue to do, but make them more resilient and adaptable to the kind of shocks that we're seeing today. So really stay involved, but add this dimension, which we weren't really looking at before. We were looking more at cost efficiency. We were not looking at resilience. Second, I think from COVID, we learned that traceability is really important. We need to know in case of a shock or a disruption, where are the products and the cargo along the supply chain. So I think traceability and investing in digitalization and digital solutions will be important, and we haven't perhaps done enough of that in our interactions with governments. Also, cooperation among countries. I believe that if there are disruptions, you will need to come up with alternative routes, alternative ports. So thinking of this ahead of time so that countries can create collaboration mechanisms among themselves in the event of a shock, I think will also be helpful. For us inside the bank and the MDBs, it will be good to start doing data and analytics also differently. What the IMF is doing with the Port Watch, for example, is great because it's in real time. We're also doing some data, gathering some data for real-time stress. If there is a shock, then exactly what will be the impact of that shock at this time, and how to better react, therefore, to find a solution. And we're also doing a mapping of the exposure of global value chains to shocks. So I think these kinds of data and analytics that we haven't been thinking about before will be important, and the more we can do together, I believe, the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona. So I see Jan wanted to also intervene. Jan, please.
Thanks so much. Building a bit on Serkan, also what Mona said in terms of the more data, more information allows us to see vulnerabilities, risk, negative aspects. It also allows us to see more potential. It's about the chicken and the egg. If we don't have demand, ships will not come and not provide the service. But at the same time, if there's no transport service, trade cannot develop. And I think with more and more data we have about shipping supply, the AIS data, the connectivity index, we've just last Friday updated our own liner shipping connectivity index. And also, thank you very much, dear World Bank. We have done a data set together about transport costs. So we have also on the cost side. So with this, I think there's some potential. We see if there was a transport service, if there were lower transport costs, better connectivity, lower trade costs between country A and B, then there would be more trade. And then next step is that's where one might even want to subsidize at the beginning some new transport services. So that's one point I wanted to make. And the second quick point, you have all very correctly highlighted the increased vulnerabilities. We can actually measure how freight rates have become more volatile over the last decades. And this is poison for investors. Any investor who has more uncertainty, more risks, will require a higher rate of return on his investment in a port, in a ship, in a new shipping service. And so we do see a real risk of not enough transport capacity for the upcoming challenges. We need more ships, newer ships, different ships, alternative fuels on ships. So we would actually, as the world fleet gets older and ports have to renew and provide alternative fuels, alternative bunkering, you would need more investment. But with the more volatility, which all of you have nicely described, the private sector is a little less inclined to invest, which then again gives roles to the likes like the World Bank or IMF to support this with investment and public funding. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Jan. So, so what I'm hearing is essentially more data, more tools. The Port Watch and more analytics. So, what is the future of this space? Do we, are we moving towards more use of artificial intelligence or machine learning? And how do you see the landscape of everything you've talked about, the future of logistics? Is it more embracing? How do we embrace the, let's say, the new technologies, and how do you see that opening up? I don't know if anyone wants to answer that question. Go ahead.
I'm not the engineer on this information of those, but simple transport. But looking at the Port Watch, honestly, this is the first time I saw. It's also related to what Jan said. Actually, how our work should be focusing on, is it really the rate of return or what? So this against disruption, we also consider a just in case situation. So looking at that map, I saw one map actually looking at the east end, west end on those ports. So the one approach also may look into show up on the inland container depot. It's landlocked countries or those. That may also help this how this disruption affects these routes. And then the areas, if it's coming in, it's very interesting, maybe very difficult. But those things also may be interested on this. And then all in all, those kind of information there, definitely maybe AI or whatever the brain will resolve the optimum routing or those. But at the same time, those are landlocked countries, and then also where the rate of return may be a bit lower. For example, already mentioned this shipping cost. Current PRC EU connection, if ocean route, it's a $2,000 per, and then the 60 days. If it's by rail, northern route, $4,000, but the 30 days. But it's a middle cost, $7,000 and the 30 days. Definitely least attractive, but may offer quite alternative routes just in case. So those areas, as Jan said, that's where maybe we MDB also may better focus on that areas. So other areas, maybe some private sector or those we can also rely on those activities, etc. Yeah, just think loud. So I stop here. Yeah. Okay.
Very good, thank you. So, yeah, I see Lulu wants to answer as well. Go ahead.
Can I add a little bit on smart technology or digitalization? Because for in the realm of urban delivery or last mile delivery, we have seen a lot of unconventional players, especially startups. IT companies are disrupting this field. In the case of China, we have seen using GPS to monitor the locations of the vehicles and combined with software to forecast the potential locations of traffic congestion so that companies can dynamically reroute their vehicles to avoid the traffic congestion. And also when shipping high value added products like medicines, we have seen companies install cameras or sensors within the containers so that they can monitor the temperature and the status of the freight and share with the customers to avoid the breakage of the freight. And also for last mile deliveries, we have also see increasing number of cities that are piloting drones for the last mile deliveries, which is also useful in case of nature disasters or traffic congestion. efforts. And although these kind of technologies mostly apply to the last mile delivery, but some of them have potentials to be applied to the entire global supply chain to improve the overall efficiencies and the resilience of the entire system. The last thing I want to point out is that these kind of technology has a high cost at this moment. They are mostly employed by large companies, but for small companies that still dominate the freight market, they still need low cost solutions. That's it.
So I wanted to see if there were any questions from the floor. And I think that there's a question from or if there's any question from people online. So go ahead, Max.
Thank you, Charles. Yeah, we have one question from the online audience, which I think is interesting because it relates back to how you had started this session. And I think it addresses all panelists. So the question is, what are the key actions governments, but also businesses should take to shift from the previously dominating just-in-time approach to the new just-in-case approach?
So maybe actually that was actually going to be my last question. So somebody's reading my notes, but maybe each of you can answer that question. What would be your advice to governments and businesses that if we want to shift to what Mona has talked about, the just-in-case approach?
Thank you very much. Things that are happening today, all these disruptions and some reshoring is happening and so on. It's happening for two reasons. One, it's because businesses themselves saw the risks that we are observing and are adjusting according to their own business needs. And two, governments are putting in place policies that are reinforcing this reshoring. For the first one, what can we tell businesses? I think businesses know what needs to be done, and they're smarter than us. And I don't think they need the government to tell them, how to adjust to these things. They're adjusting already. So, they're good. In terms of governments, I think that this reshoring is not always justified. So some reshoring is because of geopolitical tensions, so it gets into politics. We can't say much about it. But it's really creating a deglobalization that is going to affect countries' growth. It threatens to fragment the world. So I think these kinds of policies that governments, especially in developed countries, are putting in place under different guises of national security or maybe sometimes climate mitigation, they are justified, but maybe they didn't look at the impact of them. It remains to be seen. In terms of just in time and just in case, it was all about just in time before, because it was all about being cost effective, fast, reliable, all of these things. And as I said, during COVID, we saw the private sector move slightly into a just in case in their own businesses and building inventories and all that. Certainly, they're thinking about just in case of alternative routes. But in terms of building inventories and these kinds of inside the firm kind of change, it seems from the data that we have that it has slowed down a little bit. So I will stop here.
Maybe Hiro, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so from the transport side, actually, I fully agree. And then also definitely soft side improvement, infrastructure takes time. Both sides, this private sector, government side, just in case we require diversification. That's I think that's the most important thing. And then the diversification of routes takes time and cost and the justification. But with those data analytics, so those could be able to find a cost-effective way of solutions. It's a soft side. It's as mentioned, this customs operations efficiency and the port business efficiency. There are lots to do. And then some study, we also found out that without a substantial infrastructure improvement, if it's a port operations efficiency, the custom modernization done, quite a substantial efficiency materialized. So it's a matter of the how private sector goes for be ready. Private sector, they also take it as a positive to diversify the routing, not a traditional way of thinking on the just-in-time. That's the one thing. On the government side, this custom modernizations and the port operational operations efficiency improvements, those things need to push forward. I think that's the required, and then definitely the collaboration with among the several governments. I stop here.
Very good. Thank you.
Maybe just I agree with the two panelists. If I could add just maybe one more thing on the climate side, as countries do their adaptation plans, it's important thing to think about making sure their infrastructure is also climate resilient, because we're trying to show in one of the charts that it's not even just their own country, but in the global supply chain, could be certain nodes where if there are big climate vulnerabilities or the infrastructure is not climate resilient, there could be ripple effects. So from that perspective, it may be regional maybe approaches to think about these kinds of problems. Mentioned the experience of the Pacific may be useful, because perhaps part of the problem is that it's not just that there's geo-economic tensions, but also because the infrastructure is also getting more vulnerable as we have more and more increasing climate risks. So from that perspective, investing in climate resilient infrastructure, not at the country level, but at the regional level, maybe in the interest of all countries in that region.
Great. Little, please, yeah.
Just add to this point, I think both government and private sector can do risk analysis, like what we do for adaptation planning and understanding all different types of risks and the potential costs of tackling the risks and the benefit of avoiding supply chain disruption. That would be helpful in the platform. Portwatch platform and other type of digital platform would also be helpful to perform these kind of risk analysis. And second thing is reset the KPI system, both for the government and for the private sector. Currently, just-in-time approach using the KPI system that focuses on time efficiency and the inventory levels and so on and so forth, that really add on with the just-in-case approach. So in that case, we would need to design up new KPIs like resilience measures we considered and the time to cope with different kind of risk, and put weights on different KPIs that can potentially have conflicts. That's it.
Great. Jan, do you want to intervene here?
Yeah, thanks. Two quick thoughts, maybe. To support what Mona said about what we see, what we don't see. There was a lot of talk about nearshoring, but actually the distance traveled for most commodities has been going up, so it's not near. There is an attempt of, when you want to call it friendshoring, and I'm not sure if it's already out, but the next quarterly UNCTAD Trade Watch just showed how there is a certain increase in concentration in supply chains. And one could argue that leads to more risk because you depend more on fewer, but to the extent that this concentration is in my own country, then it may reduce my risk, my dependency on others. Second quick thought on the just-in-time, just-in-case. Over the decades, if you look at data on expenditure on logistics, the share, now the hard data on the United States, the share of logistics expenditure on inventory holding used to be higher than the share on transport. Now you basically have either inventory holding or transport. In 1980, there was more expenditure on inventory holding than on transport in the United States. Up to 2-3 years ago, it was twice as much expenditure on transport than on inventory holding, which very nicely reflects what we are saying: more just in time, smaller parcels, more efficiency, better trade station, better digital. It's all good. Over the last 2 years, the share of expenditure on inventory has been going up again, even though transport costs, the price has also gone up, but the one on inventory went up even more. And I think this is bad. This is an indicator of an inefficiency. And the latest indication, we don't have the data yet, but it seems to be going back in the direction of the long-term trajectory: lower share of expenditure on inventory holding, more expenditure on transport, not because transport is more expensive, but because it's getting better and cheaper, thanks to all of you working on transport. So we want more of it.
Very good. Any last minute burning question from the floor? Somebody's scratching but not asking a question. Okay. With that, I think I'll close. I wanted to say that it was quite informative, and I quite enjoyed this format. What I'm hearing is that there seems to be a consensus that actually supply chains are more vulnerable. Coming into this meeting, I was wondering whether globalization was the issue, but I'm hearing now that it's mostly about geopolitics, the policies, and protectionism and policies that people have, but also climate change is going to be an emerging significant threat, and we are in for more vulnerable supply chains. Also, it seems that technology would be part of solution. We saw a great example from Portwatch, great platform that's just in time. But Mona and others and Jan talked about the need for more analytics and more data, which informs us, because without the data, it's hard to know what's really happening, and things are shifting quite significantly. And I hear that there's so private sector finds more risks, and they may want to get more de-risking instrument. We talked about that earlier today, but there's a role for government for essentially focusing on solutions that are, maybe regional ports, maybe more trade facilitation, but anticipation and collaboration is definitely what we heard. So quite an interesting panel. I hope you got out of it as much as I did, and thank you for your attention. I think now we have a coffee break, and after the coffee break, a plenary session 5 on rethinking mobility for more and better jobs. So thank you so much for your attention and for your participation. Many thanks to the panelists. So Mona, Hiro, Serkan, Lulu, and Jan, thank you very much. Enjoy the coffee break.